All right, how's everybody doing? All right. My name is Kyle. I am Brad's youngest son. Now, before we get started, what did I say?
Brad's youngest son.
Well, I'm not Brad's youngest son. He has so many that's hard to keep track of. But no, I am John's youngest son. Now, before we get started, I just want to remind everybody that this is a non-smoking building. Not that you didn't know that, he would just want me to say it's a stupid rule. And now, as unfortunate as losing a father is, this is a celebration of life. So I think most of you know me by now, that I'm going to look on the lighter side of things and see the humor in everything. And I actually wanted it to be a comedy roast style feel, but mom said tone it down. All right. I think I get that side from my dad. He would always, I'm sure you can all pay tribute to this. He would always start. If you haven't seen me in a while, he'd say, "Heard a cute joke the other day." And if you knew him, you know that it was probably less cute and probably more offensive and really crude, which, that was par for the course for him, for sure. Also, you didn't have to know him for him to start like that and bust out an inappropriate joke. You could be the receptionist, you could be the golf marshal, you could be just waiting in line at the store, and he would tell you, there's no filter on the guy. I have no doubt that Don feels all the love from everybody that showed up here today, especially the ones that traveled all across the country. Jesse Taylor, great steak dinner last night. Now, he obviously would never admit that or tell that to anybody. Wasn't really the best at expressing emotion. Well, actually, that's not true. He was real good at expressing frustration. Like, real good at it, you know?
I play dog.
But what he lacked in, talking about emotions, he would make up for with literally talking about everything and anything at length, too much length. Again, I think everybody has experienced a uncomfortably close into your personal space, drawn out way too long, ignoring social cues of like, hey, I gotta get going, just completely ignored with the other thing is just way too close to you. Now, as I say that, I'm all self-conscious, and I hope I'm not replicating that today. If I am, keep me in check. I did inherit a lot of traits from my dad. I will begrudgingly admit that. Luckily, his hair wasn't one of them. I mean, it's going great, but at least I still got it, so I'm okay with that. I think our family barber Emil is also thankful for that. The guy wouldn't be in business without his sons. As long as I can remember, my dad has always had an older look to him, if you will. Basically, I'd like to describe him as an older Hulk Hogan without the impressive physique. So old looking, in fact, that I remember one time in elementary school, my teacher said to me, "Kyle, your grandpa's here to pick you up." Having never met either of my grandfathers, I just thought to myself, wow, you must mean my dad, or I'm being abducted. But I guess we'll find out shortly. Now, I've always thought maybe he had kids just to help around the house. You know what I mean? Just more hands for all the chores and yard work and the dreaded projects. My God, all the projects. That includes electrical, plumbing, carpentry, and anything else that you should go to school for that he felt, yeah, I got it. Now, to give him credit, he did know a lot of those things. So after like the third or fourth revision, it was good enough. Yeah. I mean, for not being a really religious family, a lot of those projects resulted in, Jesus Christ, said a lot at our house. So, again, not too religious, but the name was mentioned a lot. Sports is what my dad's real passion was for. This is what even before I was around. There was Don the athlete. I literally wrote in here, pause for chuckle and disbelief. There's photos. I mean, I've never seen it, but for the most part, I would say that He was more of a coach than an athlete, that's for sure, but his love of sports stemmed from the Flames, the Cowboys, and the Boston Bruins. So much so that I remember going to a Calgary Flames game and seeing him in his Boston Bobby Orr jersey, and we were not playing Boston. So hilariously, just still dedicated to the Bruins, right? Hockey, baseball, well, actually, sort of fast pitch. Yeah, wasn't baseball. Not too sure why he didn't think a career in sports would have been good for his sons. Not a whole lot of potential income future from fast pitch, but it was fun. It was fun, besides that questionable decision. Yeah, he definitely gave us the gift of sports, both me and my brother. Still to this day, I have no idea how he was able to put us through hockey and baseball and tournaments every single year. Mom, I'm going to give you a shout out to that. I know that was your financial juggling, definitely not his. But that was definitely what he put his focus on, that for sure. Actually, I still remember we helped pay for our fees by working a bingo hall, literally just across over there. Again, I'll remind you, this is a non-smoking building, but it 100% was not when we as kids were working those bingos, let me tell you. Sure. So we helped contribute to that as well. The cool part about the venue today, too, is that he spent so much of his time here, and we as a family, our photos are plastered all throughout here. All throughout the community, you'll see our whole family. And actually, if you go into the arena, look at the largest trophy in there, you'll see this guy's name. This is the humble brag there. Once his kids were done with competitive sports, that's where he had a lot more free time as he wasn't coaching, so he put his focus on hunting. That's more so Brad's thing than mine. And golf, I'd enjoy the links with him every once in a while, but I'll save those for the next speakers. They've got some stories about it. A lot of great memories with my dad and all the cousins. Sylvan Lake with Marvin and Joanne, Ryan and Stacy. Stacy, I'm sure you can attest that most of his experience was predominantly with boys. So you were the first. And I'm sure that just helped with the experience once we started getting a little bit more female side of things in the cousin line. You'd think that would give him, a little bit more experience for when Colin and Stacy produced 3 more girls. You got Dana, Natalie, and Lauren, but I'll let them leave the review on that. They're the ones that can speak to that. Being able to travel with my dad, we went back east to his hometown, Sudbury, and surprised his brother with his, I think it was the 60th birthday. And that was a blast. I actually hid behind the bar. It was a surprise for his brother. I hid behind the bar and just basically made fun of him until he realized, who is this bartender being so rude to me? And then he looked at me and he's, oh, yeah, it's him. So it was awesome to be able to see him and his brother reminisce in the whole stomping grounds. And he told me all the stories about, here's where this happened, and here's where I learned this, and all that. So it's a really cool experience. And now, again, going back to how he's not really one to be sentimental or emotional, I can let you know, seeing the family tree grow, thanks to Brad and Mel, Parker, Nolan, Lachlan, and Corbin, they absolutely made the Grinch's heart grow 2 times. Boys, just to be clear, I'm not blaming his heart attacks on me either. That's not what I meant by that. I just meant he did. Some of you might also know and remember that I actually shared a birthday with my grandma, my mom's side, Nana. You would know this because we would have joint birthday parties where I would try to outdrink her. That is one memory. I really wish I would have listened to my dad. He tried to warn me. He's been down that road, and he was like, "Don't do it. Don't try to outdrink Nana." Those warnings made me really wish I listened to him. But and then one thing that I'm really grateful for, and speaking of that, is he was able to meet my amazing partner Jackie, as well as my firstborn Hank. Now, the cool part about Hank is that he actually shares a birthday with my dad. Same birthday, which is cool because I shared a birthday with my grandma. So that's something that we can, remember as an awesome little tidbit. He'd always call and just say, "Hey, how's the battle going with my birthday buddy?" And it was awesome. I love that for sure. And all I can hope for is that Hank's better at holding the flashlight than me and Brad were, because we never could really figure that out. It was a struggle for sure. All right, well, that does it for my speech. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to bring up Sandy. This is Dawn's only sister. Sandy, the floor is yours.
I'm going to try using this. Can everyone hear me? Okay, so, I'm not on.
Just stand a little
Closer? Is that better? Okay. Well, first of all, good morning, and thank you all for coming. My name is Sandy McCrindle, and I'm Dawn's only and older sister. Having lost our brother Ken to lung cancer in January of 2022, I am now the last survivor of our generation. And I'm here today to share with you some of my memories of Dawn's early years. And there's no one here to challenge my facts. Donald Bruce Holloway was born in Sudbury, Ontario on January 20th, 1948, nearly 3 years after me. Don was the boy that Dad thought I should have been. He was a boy's boy right from the start. Don loved the rough and tumble, the physical challenges, and the great outdoors. Life began in a small house on Lansdowne Street, right across from Lansdowne Street Public School, where we lived until a few years after our youngest brother Ken was born. Our second family home was in a new subdivision in the west end of Sudbury. It was flanked by Park Lawn Cemetery, Byng Street Playground, and the southern boundaries of International Nickel Company of Canada. We watched the sky turn red from the molten slag being dumped down designated sites. And it was here that Don went tobogganing down the forgotten slopes. He played softball in the graveyard with the neighborhood gang and learned to play hockey on an outdoor rink organized by the Neighborhood Hockey Association. Princess Anne Public School was less than 2 blocks away, and that's where formal education began, with classes from kindergarten through to grade 8. We were a YMCA family. Here, Don participated in the swimming, gym, and leader corps programs, which helped to channel his excess energy. Summers were spent at the YMCA residential camps of Wyland and Joan Island, where water sports and canoe trips added to the fun. It was at the Y where Don's leadership training and experience began. Our dad believed that we should see Canada before traveling elsewhere. And so, in our early years, we packed up the car and traveled across the country. First to the West Coast, and then the East Coast. We tented in provincial parks, stopping to take pictures and read the historical landmarks. I remember Don overdosing on Okanagan cherries and then vomiting them out the backseat window. The summer road trips ended once Mom and Dad purchased a cottage, or camp, as we Northerners call it, on beautiful Long Lake. We moved out to the camp once school was out and returned home to stay after Labor Day. Since the camp was only 30 minutes from our home on Westview Drive, we were able to commute even with our summer jobs. And while some of our favorite memories were of Long Lake, it was a challenge for Mom, with no running water or electricity for the first few years. swimming across the lake was a prerequisite to being able to take up the canoe or the sailing surfboard that was fondly and aptly named Bottoms Up. Grandpa Fowler, my mom's father, was the only one with a motorboat big enough to pull us behind on a flying saucer, and then later water skis. Don attended Sudbury High School, where his love of sports now included football and all the injuries that are associated with it, downhill skiing, and more hockey. One of Don's most memorable highlights was being asked to attend the Halliburton Hockey Haven Sports Camp, where he rubbed shoulders with some of the hockey heroes of the day: Bobby Orr, Mike Walton, Pete Mahavlich, and Bernie Perron. I have been told that it was Bobby Orr who checked Don hard and said, "Welcome to the big leagues, rookie." We attended St. Andrew's United Church as a family, at least September through June. Didn't all churches close for the summer? Here, Don and Ken sang in the youth choir, and under the direction of Betty Lee, music was taught and songs were sung, along with unsanctioned fun and frivolity. It was after I left home to attend the University of Guelph and the passing of our Cocker Spaniel Taffy that Don was introduced to Springer Spaniels and our new family pet, Rogue's Lady Gem. Obedience training and trials were successfully completed, and Don was hooked. The story of Don's relationship with the four-legged canines would continue throughout his life. It was also around that time that Dad replaced the ping pong table with a billiard table in an attempt to keep these underage boys at home and away from the den of iniquity. And although well-intentioned, I don't know how effective that was. Don was a loyal brother. He took the heat when Ken's beer bottles were found in Dad's car. As a result, Don lost his driving privileges and had to pay for his own insurance, but he never betrayed Ken. Neither of these boys were of legal drinking age. Don was supportive to me through the declining health of my first husband, and when our beagle of 17 years passed away, Don sent Mackenzie, an 8-week-old Bichon Shih Tzu puppy, via Air Canada to fill the void. This simple act of kindness was life-changing for both Ian and myself. Even in his early years, Don loved the limelight. In due course, his larger-than-life personality led him to leave Sudbury for a bigger stage. He took his enthusiasm and optimism to Mount Royal Junior College. Don loved life and lived it to the fullest. He thrived in the Western culture, and he loved Calgary in particular. He never looked back. The next chapters of Don's life are for others to recall. Thanks for the memories, Don. The early years are mine, and mine alone to treasure and retell. Thanks.
All right, so that is the first time I've heard about where he tobogganed. I don't know if you guys caught that, but that explains a lot. Hey, let's go tobogganing. Let's go on this pile of lead and arsenic. Like, I can just imagine having the chat with his dad, like, I scraped my knee, rub some lead and arsenic in it. My God, that's hilarious. That's like probiotic nowadays, but on steroids. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Sandy. Also, I forgot that he trained dogs. Those dogs were probably way more obedient than his boys. But now to talk a bit more on the friendship side of things, I'm going to bring up our next speaker. He's known him since before I was around, and I actually don't know which one is going first, but they've both known him for forever. Who is it, Felty? You going up? Is it Phelpsy? Yeah, Phelpsy. Stephen Phelps. He's come to the stage. I don't know why I'm doing this. Again, I told you I wanted a comedy vibe. I was like, we're coming to the stage, Steve Phelps. Come on over here, bud. I'll set this mic up for you.
There you are. Hi, everybody. Excuse me, raspy voice. My name is Steve Phelps. Don and I have been friends in Calgary since we met in the fall of '68. I was privileged to be part of Don and Lois' wedding party, and now I'm here to celebrate his life. Just check the picture on there. I just want to talk to you about it for a bit. Eckville Indoor Rodeo is celebrating its 60th year anniversary this year. Back in 1970, some of the competitive events were not nearly the same as today. Take, for instance, the cow and saddle event. Not known to the SPCA, a number of cows with ropes dangling around their necks were released into a corral and chased by a team of 3 whose job it was to rope the cow, winch on a saddle, and then ride it over the finish line first. Who else but a 22-year-old city slicker accepted a dare from Lois to put in a team? Besides, the pressure was on. His future brother-in-law, Marvin, had won the event the year before. Besides, they tried looking pretty ridiculous, but emerged unscathed and were really popular with the crowd. The picture shows Don's nose to nose with the cow, always competitive and up for a challenge. It's interesting that our paths actually crossed much earlier than in our lives without knowing it. And this relates to you, Sandy, with what you said. Don grew up in Sudbury and spent a lot of time in the YMCA while I was growing up in Lindsay, Ontario, going to summer camp at Hamilton YMCA, Camp Wanakita, located near Halliburton, Ontario on Koshman Lake. Now, the relevance of this is in the next page of Wanakita was the Halliburton Hockey Haven, which was developed in the 60s by Boston Bruin NHL executive Jim Gregory and Ren Blair, and players including Bernie Perron and Bobby Orr. So this is really interesting. Here's what you've been talking about, and that information I got from Don just over years chatting. So in fact, we were right next door to each other without knowing. So the unknown connection that started between us. I still go back to camp for reunions and think of Don and my experiences. So that was our first connection without knowing it. Getting back to the YMCA, I transferred to Calgary and arrived on May 13, 1968, working in private healthcare. Not knowing anybody, I went to the downtown YMCA on 6th Avenue, as any good young Christian man would, and applied to be a volunteer. So who did I meet with Don, who was the intermediate leader? So although we were unaware, this would be part of the start of a long-term relationship. We moved together in Calgary in 1904 11th Avenue Southwest, 3rd floor apartment, with a third roommate called Peter Resende. We lived paycheck to paycheck using stacked beer cases with towels for end tables. Peter worked as a sales rep in Chiquita Bananas, so we were never out of peanut butter and banana sandwiches. We also fancied ourselves as folk singers, and Peter and I played guitar and harmonica, with Don singing, tambourine, and being our agent. We called ourselves Cheshire Cat from the Alice in Wonderland. We were terrible, but at best, Agent Don was a great promoter, got us an initial gig with what we thought was a coffee bar. It ended up being a full concert at the Holy Cross. Thank goodness for sing-along songs that salvaged us. One of our favorite songs, Thirsty Goose by Eric Anderson, I still listen to this day, and it reminds me of our experiences when I hear it. But nothing ventured, nothing gained. That was Don, for sure. Don never defined or thought about being a friend. He just was, and we were tight. Don thought I should become a hunter. He had this uncompromising drive that had to be held in check from time to time. I ultimately rented a shotgun from Russell Sporting Goods and went out on my first duck shoot out to Weed Lake, which is kind of Langdon now. My gun jammed, but we got several ducks. I think he enjoyed me queasing as I was gutting the birds as much as shooting. As we were sorting out the ducks, looking west towards Calgary, we looked at light spots moving erratically across the dark horizon. He was convinced that these could have been aliens. And if you ask him today, he'll tell you the same thing. They were aliens. If you ever wanted to meet a dog lover, this was Don. My understanding is that he grew up at home in Sudbury with a Springer Spaniel named Jim. So for the next 50 years, there was always been a dog at home. And I'll try to remember them. Monty, Hamish, Rogue, Fergus, Ginger, and that's what I remember about I got that right?
That's right.
And then came the Skittles generation.
Well, that was,
There were Skittles, Bandit, Giraffe, and Shadow. Did I get that? Okay, good. Families with dogs are loving families. Don and I were hunting snow geese somewhere around Halkirk, Alberta, and experienced a phenomenon together that we often reminisced on over the years. Actually, there were two. We had spotted snow geese in a small lake in the afternoon and decided to do the shoot the next morning. We were in Don's Scout, so some of you remember that, and decided to sleep in the vehicle rather than Halkirk. It was a cozy fit, with Don and I sleeping knees bent head to foot. Monty was in the front seat. So when Don came, Monty decided to creep Don and jumped in the back seat licking his face. Guess what end of excited Monty I got? The next morning, Don and I experienced a sight that we'll remember forever. We were on the west side of the lake, elevated, looking down on the lake full of snow geese on the water. Snow geese are white with black tips, smaller than Canada geese. The morning sun was a bright orange. Just coming over the eastern horizon, and snow geese started to lift off the lake in a spiraling column. It was absolutely spectacular and left us in awe. It was probably one of those moments that Don actually didn't have something to say. But that was our experience to share together. Don's email address, Coach Doc, was really a creative description of who he was. It probably started with his background in the YMCA, sports, and kinesiology at Mount Royal. He coached volleyball at Mount Royal College, and both Brad and Kyle excelled as athletes including fastball. That really shouldn't surprise you, considering the gene pool he inherits as well as Don. And he also coached and managed several fastball teams in the city. He loved being there and organizing. He thought that I should be playing fastball. And eventually that happened. With us playing together over the years in several fastball teams at Shoal Park. Bank of Montreal, the Diggers, Forzani Selects, Jackson Metal, Pepe's Pizza, Centennial Texaco. I'd flatter myself if I told you that I actually remember those teams, but I just happen to have kept all the jerseys back in the way, and I had to go through them to find out the names of the teams. Don was an excellent jump ball pitcher. He got me started in ball, and I'm still playing slow pitch today. It's interesting the influence that he has on me. The dog part of this email was interesting. If you had an accident, or as an example, broke your arm, he would know the proper first aid, and then tell you that you broke your radius or ulna, what type of fracture it was, whether it was distal or medial, and when you'd be back playing. But he should know. See, he'd broken several bones, especially his nose. I have to say there were times during his own personal treatments when he stoically talked about his condition that I found difficult to handle. But admired his strength and his optimism. If he could help in any way, he would. He referred me to several people over the years. For example, he referred me to a barber just before my wedding. I'm still going to fill after 50 years. Lois and I talked this morning. I needed a physiotherapist. Don sent me LifeMark to a friend. And Mike Westaway has been treating me for the next 40 years. So those connections he made were just bona fide. I talked to Don on the phone more than anyone, period. 875-9797. The message is follows. Hi, you have reached the voicemail of Don Holloway, Prodigy Athletic Wear. Please leave a name with your name, a message with your name, number, and the time you called, and I will return your call as soon as possible. Have a great day. And that was the message. When he called me and got a message, he would reply saying, Phelpsy, Holloway here. Answer the phone. What, you gone to bed already? Call me. Don was the talker. I was the listener. Conversations would never be short. We talked about current activities relevant and not relevant to us. The past, the future. His memory was exceptional, so reminiscing was very common. Conversations would never be short and always a joke. I don't know where he got them, especially before the internet. They could be put into a Reader's Digest. Mind you, it would have to be an adult edition. These calls became more important, especially in the last few years, when both the move to Sylvan Lake and Exchange and Hill. When Lois called to let me know that Don was in ICU, Red General, I went to see him. I was not prepared to see him on life support. So after going out to the window to cry for a few minutes, Stephanie, Don's nurse, said to me, you know, he may be able to hear you. I brought a chair around to his side. I sat with him, not saying anything, but absorbing the situation. I finally felt the comfort with him and started talking to him for the next little while. I believe he was listening and laughing. There was a spirit emanating from him that would be part of him forever. Rest in peace. My old friend. Always in my memory.
Thank you, Steve. All right, we're going to keep the same kind of, I guess, long-lasting history going. Another friend of Don's since before I was probably even a thought. We're going to bring up, I believe, Nair, is it you next? I didn't really go over this with them. Who is it? Is it Spreen next? I'm going to bring up John Spreen. He is one of our long-term neighbors from just 2 houses up the street. Here's John Spreen.
Hi, I'm John Spreen. I am a longtime neighbor of Don's. So Don Holloway, Coach Doc, his email name, pretty much hits the nail on the head. I've known Don for many years. We were neighbors in Thorncliffe. Our kids were roughly the same age. Don was a very outgoing person. He was always the first one to welcome anyone to the neighborhood. He always made a point to introduce himself, give the general lay of the land to all newcomers, and get the neighbors to know each other. We called him the neighborhood icebreaker. We were good neighbors and friends and would quite often spend New Year's Eve at someone's place, along with our in-between neighbors, Reg and Bert. I remember we gave Don and Lois one of our dogs when they lost their I think the last one was Roe. We gave them one of our Bichon Shih Tzu's pups named Skittles. Don wasn't very fussy about small dogs, but he sure fell in love with those ones. I think Skittles lived over 22 years, maybe longer. They even bred Skittles, and they still have one of their pups that's just as old. Don had strong opinions on certain topics. Politics, banks, and sports topped the list. He hated the Liberal and the NDP party, despised Trudeau, who he called Trudeau. I used to push Don's buttons from time to time when the feds did another dumb thing by telling him, I hope you never voted for Trudeau again. He would jump all over me with some of his colorful language and just disgust that I just didn't get it. He hated that party. As far as banks go, in his opinion, none of them were much good for anything if you ever needed them. That was pretty much his standard answer whenever we talked about it. Another one that I used to get him on rare occasions when the Maple Leafs would beat the Boston Bruins. I would tell him, looks like the Leafs beat up the Bruins. He would blow up and describe how much he hated the Leafs, and that I should know the Bruins was always his team. Dallas Cowboys was always his NFL team. We were in total agreement supporting our Calgary Flames. We spent most games while watching on our own TVs, texting commentary back and forth, both the good and the bad that we were watching. If there was a particularly good game or a real bad one, I could expect a phone call from Don so he could share his thoughts that could not probably be described within text messages. Most of Don's phone calls lasted a long time and also included the latest joke that he just had to pass along. Don had lots of stuff. By this I mean tools and project materials. Many tools he had trouble keeping track of. Even with the garage he built, the tools and the stuff would never stay organized. The odd time I'd come to borrow something, we would spend a lot of time trying to find it. Don would blame the boys. He either borrowed it for not putting it away properly, or for Lois for reorganizing the stuff and not telling him where she put it. But we all knew the real reason was Don's mass organization concept. When I helped him clean his garage out when they moved to Sylvan Lake, he found most of his missing tools right where he left them. Don had many home improvement projects that sometimes took a little while to complete. Particular project that I recall was his kitchen cupboard renovation. It took 10 years for Lois to get doors on the cupboards. At one point, Don tried to convince everyone that it was an open cupboard concept. That excuse didn't fly particularly well with Lois. I do have to admit, though, that Don did eventually complete many of the projects he set his mind to. Coach Doc was a good choice for Don to use as an email nickname. With his schooling in kinesiology and his years of coaching, it just fit. Don used his schooling background to help with possible diagnosis for physical problems many times. Quite often he was right. He would lose me with his skeletal and body part language most times, but it was part of his shtick. His basic knowledge helped out during his coaching years as well, as he could usually discern minor from more serious potential injuries. Don coached hockey for many years in Northwest Calgary, particularly when his kids were young. He was always involved as a coach whenever his kids were playing. He strongly believed that team sport was a character builder for young people, and his years of coaching proved it. Don also coached female volleyball at Mount Royal for a couple of years anyway. At one time, Don and Lois actually both coached the boys' fastball teams. Don had Bradford, Lois had Kyle, as he was younger. Calgary newspaper actually picked up a feature, the whole family, when they played against each other one time. I think there's even a picture of the article here, if anybody wants to read it. I was fortunate to coach fastball with Don for about 12 years. During that time, the teams Don coached performed at a very high level and were regularly a favorite for a city championship and competed in provincial championships. The years he coached were so competitive that he eventually joined Young Men's Basketball League to give them competition. Even though the boys were young, they always were competitive, even against the older boys. There are pictures going on with some of the teams he coached that show many of the teams he coached, and we coached together, of course. Don was always the head coach. His knowledge of the sport was excellent, and he was a very good motivator. Don always offered positive encouragement to team players, even when mistakes were made. He could be a little excitable, but he always enjoyed the games. Sometimes my main job was just calm Don down. I could do this by a trick Lois told me many years before. If I said the word Don sharply, he would stop and look directly at me and wait for instruction. I had to use this a few times during some rather intense basketball games. Don would be on the brink of jumping out onto the ball diamond when an umpire didn't get the call right or was actually wrong. I would sternly say, "Don." He would stop, look at me, and I would explain that being mad at the umpire wasn't going to change anything and may get him tossed. He would then tightly clench his hands behind his back and politely ask the umpire if he would please explain the call for me. This just about always worked. Don's dedication to coaching was a cornerstone of his makeup. It can sometimes be a thankless job, but he thoroughly enjoyed watching the kids develop skills, friendships, discipline, and sportsmanship in the sports he coached. That was thanks enough for him. I'm going to miss our friendship and our dialogues together. He was an interesting character, and I thoroughly enjoyed our interactions. I expect a tall Rumsky and a few jokes waiting for me when we get together in the great beyond.
Thank you, John. That reminds me, if anybody needs any power tools, I think we have about 4 of any kind of power tool for sale. Somehow those made the move to Sylvan even without a garage, so we'll send out the Facebook Marketplace posts in after this. Now I'm going to bring up Nair. Nair, the stage is yours. This is another friend of his that's been around since before I was a thought. All right, buddy, you're on.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'd like to start off by thanking Lois for the opportunity to speak today. I was a little reluctant at first, but Don was a very close friend, and I've had a lot of fun with his sons and with him over the last 30-odd years. How did I come to meet the illustrious Mr. Holloway? I take you back to 1981. I'm working in a recruiting company in Calgary for the oil and gas industry, and as part of the staff, I was involved in the hiring process. And one day, I met this rather lovely, rather fetching young lady named Lois. Lois came to work for the company that I was working with. We had a lot of fun together, and during the socializing, both during the day and in the evening, Lois would constantly say to me, "You're just like my husband." When I look back on that now, I don't know whether that was a good or a bad thing. Hey, just because he's not here doesn't mean I can't give him some grief. I've heard a lot of it today. He's probably listening to us anyways. I told you I'd win. But Lois was right. We are very much alike, and our careers were mirror images of one another. We both had a very strong sports background, despite our bellies, coaching, and just the salesmanship, all of the things that Don got himself involved with. I pretty well could relate to everything that he did, although he was a rum guy and I like Scotch. How can one not be affected by the passing of a dear friend who has the exact same birthday as you do? Jan 20, 48. And I thought Don was going to be the last one. We shared many a drink to celebrate our birthdays with friendly banter, hunting and sports stories, and yes, giving grief was the order of the day. And he always tried to sell me something. Our relationship centered on sports, flames, stamps, cannons, the amateur leagues in Calgary, through the Calgary Booster Club. Don was an avid supporter of all the teams that were in Calgary and certainly took part with the Booster Club in many activities. We shared duties in helping organize the Calgary Booster Club golf tournament, which eventually he put together as a real passion for himself. But he was always the teacher, the sportsman, salesman, and the builder. He had more scraps of wood in his garage for birdhouses than all the children's stores I ever knew. To me, he was full-time Don, the deck man. I had 3 Calgary homes and 3 Don decks. And if he wasn't building, he was hunting, selling, golfing with the same passion he displayed in all the things he did. And this passion extended even to the number of golf balls he lost and the number of strokes he took. Somehow he always managed to score a bogey or a par. And of course, being on the golf course, you had a fine venue for Don to tell his jokes. On our golden golf outings, Don would always come well prepared with stories to share. We always felt that it was his way to cover up his inability to count. I did witness his hole-in-one, however. I will give him credit for that. During a wonderful golfing birthday gift from sons Brad and Kyle, we traveled to Palm Springs for some flogging and bar hopping. One evening we happened upon a bar's karaoke night. Not to be outdone by his singing offspring, Daddy Don exercised his vocal cords. I was thankful he had the sports clothing business to fall back on. No amount of rum helped his work. I recently have been doing some research on my dad's regimental uniform. He was in the Irish Regiment, Canada, during the war. And when I was doing the research, I came across the regimental motto. Fier go ba, fier go ba. Faithful until death. That's sorry. That's how I will remember.
Thank you, Nair. As most of you know, I am in real estate, so those Dawn decks of yours, you're gonna have to disclose those if you wanna sell them, for sure.
Grandfather clause.
Yeah, it's grandfathered in for, yeah, that's the only way you're gonna get away with that. That's not gonna pass inspection these days. Next for speaking, we're gonna bring up one of his, not as long-term friends, but definitely one of his closest throughout the later years of his life. Keith, come on up, the stage is yours.
What the handheld is it that one? You got it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. And I'm sorry for this speech impediment. I'll do the best to help you understand the best I can. So my name is Keith Field. I've lived in Canada with my beautiful family since 2008. So how does an English policeman end up being best buddies with a fellow like Don? It makes for an interesting, always amusing, and sometimes fraught story. Like all things Canadian, it starts with hockey. Bear with me. My son Dylan, his hockey coach at the time was Jamie Spavin, who told me that this men's league thing was going on that summer, 2011, at Glen Eagles golf course. It's on my doorstep. Jamie said it was an absolute bargain, so try stopping it. So it was summer of 2011 when Don, who also had an eye for a bargain, his men's league team and mine would compete weekly for prizes and of course bragging rights. At some point, like Don, in his inevitable way, smoke in hand, discovered how I was just getting into hunting. Golfing, hunting, Don was all over that. Don knew how to play the game of golf, not just physically, but mentally too. He could smash a long, straight drive to match any man half his age, right up until the summer before last, which was the last time I played golf with Don. When he didn't go straight and long, he'd have me in stitches, because he'd spin around after ducking his drive and look at us all with that incredible expression on his face, like, who just stole my ball out of the air? Where'd it go? And of course it was hilarious as well as sad to tell him where it actually gone, where he ducked it, hardly. But if you weren't hearing, Donnie, out on the golf course, you'd be hearing his endless repertoire of stories, or the regular miracle of founding, as Steve had already mentioned. He'd find it in the deepest rough, the thickest of trees. It took me a mighty long time to make the connection between the decreasing bulge of spare balls in his pocket and the number of balls he would miraculously find in the aforementioned deep woods and deep rock. And, as already mentioned, Don's math skills would always falter on those bad holes. I mentioned the mental game, didn't I? Don was utterly impervious to the notion of keeping the pace of play, often witnessed when he would scoot up to his ball in his car and spend an eternity checking his phone for emails, or for text, or for some divine inspiration, I never could tell. Whatever it was, it would draw the eye of the group behind us. The marshals, who all regretted telling him to hurry up, of course, and me. He knew full well, because he was sharp, that as soon as I got antsy with him with a statement of faith, my game would go to ruins, and he had me right where he wanted me. But you can never stay angry with Don for long, and it's now soothing and to laugh about it today. Whatever Don's scorecard read on any given day, he knew how to play the game. And he was deadly when he found his groove, and better than men half his age. So I mentioned hunting. Don, true to his word, took me under his wing that same year in 2011 and introduced me to elk hunting just north of Waterton Park. And what an introduction it was. Steve mentioned the spectacle of the snow geese, and I've heard that story many times. Don treated me to a front row seat of a massive 1,200 strong elk herd in in the middle of the September run. I witnessed the miracle and spectacle of nature when several massive bulls bugled, snorted, and crashed antlers to the most beautiful backdrop of sunrise in one of nature's finest theatres. Watching tons and tons of talk pushing against each other, churning up the turf like it was cotton candy, defeating one bull, returning to face the next rival, and another pair starting off their duel off to one side, is a sight I will never, ever forget. I have to pinch myself having the opportunity to having seen it, and seeing it up close and in person. And all that was thanks to Don. Despite all our efforts, Don and I never actually managed to have a successful outcome together. I had my one and only successful hunt 12 years later, this past January, and was happy and heartbroken to share that story with Don, knowing that he'd been too unwell this past season to hunt. Don and I did have a lot of deer hunting success, courtesy of one of the nicest human beings anyone could ever meet. That was Richard Wombeck, a rancher from the Longview area. Richard and his equally fine son Pete were always so generous with their time and their help whenever Don and I would go and hunt on their land. A few years ago, Don and I had a massive falling out after Don insisted on going to Richard's to hunt deer in the most diabolical winter conditions. I said to Don on the way in, geez, you wouldn't want to be having some kind of medical emergency down here today, hey? Call it sixth sense, call it ESP. I for sure couldn't tell you why those words came out of my mouth. Don got us stuck in the snow that day, not once, but twice. What did we have for tools to get us unstuck? The spade end of a snow brush was the maximum of Don's commitment to helping us get out of that situation. Richard's son, Pete, eventually pulled us out after 2 hours of digging. Once free, and thanking Pete profoundly, Don drove a few hundred feet and got us stuck once again. Don did his best, mind you, but the condition was so treacherous that day. The snow drifts were easily 4 feet by the time we tried to move away. And another 3 hours of digging ensued, until, that is, when I saw Don's lips and earlobes go blue. I had to get quite testy with Don to get him back in the truck and stop exerting himself. It was the following day when we spoke and shouted, I'm not ashamed to say, about him nearly having a heart attack in the middle of nowhere in the most horrendous winter conditions. As we've heard today, Don never acquiesces and declared he was in fine health, and I was worried about nothing. 2 weeks later, Don had a heart attack. I believe it was his second, and one that required another stent. I went to him in hospital immediately with an "I told you so." Don was contrite like a child, and not another word was said about it. About 3 years ago, Don and I had ourselves our best deer hunt, as far as big bucks go at least. Holy cow, was that ever fun. Don got the hots for a massive buck on a neighbouring property we didn't have permission on. Don was convinced he could not only hit that beast, he would also miss the farm buildings that were in the distance behind this beautiful beast on the hill. He also felt sure he could get in and out with this massive buck before anybody ever even noticed. In the industry that I came from, we called that red mist. Don called it buck fever. Whatever it was, it's when all semblance of common sense just ups and leaves you. So I managed to distract Don, point out a small group of doe that were being harassed by a couple of smaller bucks just off to the side. Having learned a great deal with Don, as well as other hunting pursuits of my own, I knew this big buck was going to come down towards those doe that were being harassed by the smaller bucks. I kept Don distracted while that buck moved in. Don lost sight of that big boy and reluctantly turned toward the group that I had spotted and got ready to start taking his shoe. I timed it to perfection. When I saw that big buck getting closer to our fence line, I tapped Don on the shoulder and very quietly whispered, "Get your bead just right at that hay bale. When that big boy jumps the fence, he's yours." To everybody's delight, Don got it. We came home that day with 2 bucks and 2 doe. Don had that big buck mounted despite the expense and the ire of Lois and the sacrifices that it took to make that happen. And I often had a hard time understanding why Don did this, goes to that much trouble, that much expense, as he did on a number of mounted game that he had in his home. During many conversations I had with Don over the years, trying to convince him to sell 1 or 2 of them, he told me of the emotional value that they had for him. Each one individual, and each one a pride, with the friendship and relationship with the person he was hunting with on that particular occasion. I think I understood in the end, however. Not only did I understand it when Don died, but I felt it too. That great mounted buck represents what he and I had together, out there in the wilderness, sharing the love of feeding our families with the finest organic meat that nature can offer. We had our adventures out there, me and Don. Some were funny, some were scary, and some were just plain outrageous. All those memories, even if they nearly killed me, more than once that happened, I will hold dear to my last day, and will be forever grateful that Don chose to share with me and teach me some of what he learned in his 50 years plus doing what he loved so dearly. I know that Nair has already touched on the Calgary Booster Club, and I've been asked to talk a little bit about Calgary Booster Club and Don's involvement in it. I'm not sure I'm the right person to do it justice, but I will try. In the hundreds of calls that Don and I had, he would occasionally mention his involvement with the Calgary Booster Club. And to be honest, I wasn't too sure what it was. Don not only spoke of great fondness he had for the time he spent with the Calgary Booster Club, but also tremendous pride. It was only very recently I had a grasp of the gravity of the club and Don's contribution. And when I say 1988, most of you are going to know exactly what I'm talking about. What put the city of Calgary on the world map? The 1988 Olympics. What made those Olympics so special? From my perspective, living 7,000 kilometres away at the time, and going about my everyday business, it was those crazy Jamaicans in the bobsled competition, and that complete nutball, Eddie the Eagle Edwards, throwing himself down the COP ski jump hills when he had no right to do so. Every now and then, stories like those Jamaicans and Eddie the Eagle Edwards that grabs the world. A little bit like the 1924 Olympics that led to the movie The Chariots of Fire. So what about Don? What about the Calgary Booster Club? What did it all have to do with this historical 1988 Winter Olympics? Well, were it not for the Calgary Booster Club and the endless hours of volunteering given by Don, the 1979 birth of the 1988 Calgary Olympics would never have happened. It was the hard-fought hours and dedication by the likes of Don that helped the Booster Club create the Olympic bid to the Olympic Committee that finally resulted in hosting the Winter Olympics for 1988 in Calgary. And the rest, as they say, is history. But we can't just blow it off. We can't just blow it off just like that. How many businesses were attracted to Calgary because of it? How many great people have migrated to Calgary to make it one of the greatest cities in the whole of North America? What about the world-class sporting facilities that still serve and enhance the life of so many in this region, some 36 years on. Whether you build something single-handed or as part of a huge team, you still built it. Don built it. Millions owe their quality of lives, including yours truly, to the likes of Don, and specifically to Don. But it didn't end there. Oh no, not for Don. As previously mentioned, Don is affectionately known as Coach. Once again, Don took great pride in that name. How did he earn that name? Well, Lois will correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe Don clocked up some 30 years or so, coaching a number of sports such as hockey, volleyball, baseball, as we've already heard, and some pretty high standards with some fine championship achievements along the way. Hundreds, if not thousands of kids and students have benefited from the hard hours Don put in to teach, mentor, and coach them. Not just in their sport, but for some, the odd life lesson along the way. How many of those kids and students went on to fulfill their sporting dreams? Better still, how many went on to teach, coach,